taking a look at those of us who have been called by God to walk into the unknown. And let's just be honest, right now it's the entire world. We're all walking into an unknown moment, into an unknown season, something we've never anticipated or never experienced before. And last week we talked a lot about the fact that this unknown is scary. It's difficult. We don't know what's going to happen next. And that fear has the potential to be a motivating factor behind it. Fear has the potential to grab our hearts and grab our moments during this time and make us just act out and do things that we never anticipated that we would end up doing. But what we learned last week was that Jesus had a message for his disciples then, and he has a message for us today. And his message is simple: fear not. Fear not. And he didn't just say it, he reiterated it over and over and over again. He took the disciples on field trips to show that, hey, you don't have to be afraid. I am with you. And he tells us today, as we're walking into an unknown season, you don't have to be afraid. I'm with you. And man, that's reassuring. But let's be honest. Just because it's reassuring doesn't mean it takes away all of our fear and our anxiety and our worry. Here's what you know to be true, and here's what I know to be true. Walking into the unknown is uncomfortable. Walking into the unknown is completely uncomfortable. And those two things are not mutually exclusive. We can have complete confidence that God is with us and still feel uncomfortable at the same time. So I just want to acknowledge that and value that. If you're trusting God with everything that's within you, but you still feel uncomfortable and you still feel worried and you're still nervous, it's okay. It doesn't mean that you're failing at this following Jesus thing. It means that you're human. And what you know to be true and what I know to be true is that when we're uncomfortable, we'll do some really weird and awkward things, right? Like when we're uncomfortable and we don't know what to do with our hands, we'll talk a lot with our hands, kind of like I'm doing every time I preach. And then other times we'll say things that really shouldn't be said. And I don't know if you saw the video this week. I wish we had an opportunity to play it for everybody, just in case you didn't. But there was this man who decided he wanted to get a cup of coffee from Tim Hortons. And he pulls to the drive-thru and he orders his cup of coffee, but then he asks the barista, sit it down in the windowsill. And so it's sitting still inside Tim Hortons. And before he ever gets his coffee and brings it into his vehicle with him, he takes a spray bottle of hand sanitizer. And he sprays the entire cup and he twists it and he sprays it again. He's going crazy. Like the only place he didn't spray was the place that his mouth was going to touch. To me, that would have been the first place I was going to spray. But hey, whatever. But I can assure you, this guy never in his life thought for a minute, you know what I'm going to do one day? I'm going to sit in a drive-thru at Tim Hortons and I'm going to spray hand sanitizer all over my coffee before I drink it. We do unexpected things when we're in the midst of an unknown season. And it's not just that guy. It's you, it's me, it's all of us. As we're walking in this unknown season, so be on the lookout for those random things that we're drawn to do. Now, what does that have to do with anything about where we're at or where we're headed this morning? Well, Jesus knew that in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of difficulty, in the midst of the unknown, we would be drawn to fear and we would be drawn to doing some things that maybe we don't typically do. And that's why he was so intentional to teach his disciples then and to teach us today that we don't have to be afraid. As we continue in Luke's account of the life and teachings of Jesus, in Luke chapter 12, which is immediately following what we talked about earlier, Jesus is having this conversation. He's teaching his followers, he's teaching the crowd. He said, look, there's something unexpected that's about to come your way. And then he doesn't even leave them guessing. He fills them in. He says, you're going to be arrested. You're going to be put on trial before governors. You're going to be put on trial before people in power and authority. And he says, don't worry about what you're supposed to say at that time because it's going to be given to you. And he reteaches and reinforces this idea that you're not going to be alone. He's teaching this to an entire group, an entire congregation of people, large group. In fact, Luke writes that the crowd was so big that they were pressing in on him. And so he teaches this. And immediately, there's somebody in the crowd who just doesn't get it. There's someone in the crowd who doesn't understand what Jesus is trying to convey, that Jesus is trying to let them know, hey, it's going to get crazy, but I'm with you. We've got this. Luke chapter 12, verse 13. Someone in the crowd said, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." This guy, he didn't hear anything that Jesus said about, hey, I'm with you. Don't worry about all those other things. I've got you. All he heard was something bad's about to happen. And his mind immediately clicked and said, you know what? I need to be prepared. And so he goes to Jesus after just hearing this incredible message. The Son of God says, you're going to be okay. I'm with you. And he goes to Jesus and says, hey, make my brothers split this money with me, because I want to make sure that as we're walking into this unknown season that I'm prepared for what's about to happen. I'm prepared for what's coming next. And I can just imagine Jesus, he was probably like, am I hearing this correctly? Like, did you even listen to what I just said? To which this guy probably would have responded, no, not really. About the money. Can we talk about the money? Can you make my brother split the money with me? Jesus says, look, I'm not going to be an arbiter between the two of you. And then Jesus turns to the disciples. He turns to the rest of the crowd. And he says this in Luke chapter 12, verse 15. He said to them, watch out. Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Again, that's Luke chapter 12, verse 15. Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life doesn't consist in an abundance of possessions. And from here, Jesus leans into a teaching and he begins to tell a story. And he tells a story that if you grew up in church world or if you're familiar with the Gospels, you're probably familiar with this story. And it seems like it's a little bit out of place. It seems like this story doesn't really fit. But as we said last week, we have been taught, many of us, as our entire growing up time, to look at some of these instances that Jesus had in his life and in his experience as isolated incidences. Like we look at them as just zoom in, and this was a singular event. And here's part of the reason why we do that is because if you've ever noticed, if you've ever read through the pages of a Bible, there are those little headings. And every time we see a brand new heading, we think, oh, this is a brand new story. This isn't anything connected. But what I want to share this morning is this is all connected. Jesus is not teaching this, at one place, and then they travel for a little while and he teaches something else. This is all chronological. It's all working together. So here's the story that doesn't seem like it fits with Jesus' big idea of fear not. He says, the ground of a certain man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. This guy had just hit the agricultural version of the lottery. He planted a little bit of seeds and he had this bumper crop come in, and I don't have enough room for all of this. I don't know where I'm going to put everything. And he continues, then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And then I'll store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you know what? You have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, be merry. Now, when we read that, that's a reasonable response for you and for me as we're looking at it like, yeah, that makes sense. This guy experienced a bumper crop. This guy experienced insane growth that he didn't expect. So makes sense for him to build bigger barns and store it away. That's a smart thing to do. We can understand his rationale, right? We look at that and we say, that's wise. But Jesus called it something else. But God said to him, you fool. You fool. This very night, your life will be demanded from you. Then, who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Jesus in this story says, God looked at this man not as someone who was being wise, not as someone who was making provisions for the future. He looked at this man as someone who was being foolish and greedy. See, the issue, I don't believe, was that Jesus had a problem with him planning for the future. I believe the issue 100% was the condition of his heart. His heart was, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to care for the needs of me and my family. And he never once gave a thought to anybody else. He never once gave a thought about someone else who could have used a little bit of what I had. I've got more than enough. And he never thought, how can I bless somebody else? His immediate thought was, I'm going to build bigger barns. And in the world that you and I live in, maybe that looks like, I'm going to clean out an entire closet, or I'm going to clean out an entire guest room, and I'm going to stock it with supplies for this unknown circumstance that I'm walking into. I'm going to go to Walmart, I'm going to go to Meijer, I'm going to go to wherever, fill in the blank of your favorite place, and I'm going to wipe the shelves completely clean. And I'm going to make sure that I'm taken care of. See, here's what we have to understand this morning. When my potential future need, that need that isn't even here yet, when my potential future need robs you of meeting your current need, I'm no longer planning for my future. I'm damaging your present. I want to say that again. When my future need robs you of meeting your current need, I am no longer planning for my future. I'm damaging your present. We don't like to think about it like that. We don't like to think that my planning for the future, or I'm just going to call it what it is, my hoarding, is affecting somebody else. If you wanted to write that down, I believe we've got it on the screen for you. I don't know how we can look at it and think, you know what, this is okay. I can just go and buy 732 packages of toilet paper because, you know, my family's going to need it. Well, maybe they will, but maybe your neighbor will too. And Jesus had an interesting way that he ended this parable. He said this in Luke 12:21. This is how it will be with whoever stores things up for themselves but is not rich towards God. So to backtrack just a little bit, he said, this is foolish what you've done. Your life is being demanded of you tonight. Then who's going to get what it is that you were saving for yourself? And then Jesus says, this is how it's going to be for those who are storing up for themselves, but they're not rich towards God. It's an interesting way to end this parable. And what exactly did Jesus mean by that? Well, he doesn't leave us wondering. Many of his parables were really difficult to understand, and he would have to explain and over-explain. And so that's what he did. He took a moment and he called the disciples in and he says, all right, guys, let me fill you in on what that meant. Here's what he said in verse 22. Then Jesus said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you're going to eat, or about your body, what you're going to wear. For your life is more than food, and your body is more than clothes. And then he continues, he says, consider the ravens. Consider the ravens. They don't sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than birds. He's pointing back to something he had told them earlier. He says, guys, remember, we had this conversation already. You're a lot more important than, and you're worth more than many sparrows. He says, you're a lot more important than birds. Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Then he continues, since you can't do this very thing, since you can't add even an hour to your life, why do you worry about the rest? Then he says, consider the wildflowers. They don't labor, they don't spin. And yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. And if that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and is tomorrow thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you? And then he hits the point that he wants to make through this entire scenario. Oh, you of little faith. This entire teaching, this entire encounter was all about Jesus reinforcing the fact that I am with you. I've got you. You can trust me. You are not walking into the unknown alone. I am with you. Again, to go back to verse 21, that weird way that Jesus ended this parable, he says, this is how it's going to be. Whoever stores up things for themselves but isn't rich towards God. So what does Jesus mean about being rich towards God? What does that look like in your life? What does it look like in my life? How can we be rich towards God? It's caring for those created in the image of God. It's not only caring for our own needs, but it's meeting the needs of those who have needs to be met. And then Jesus wants to give some assurance, like, look, I want you to understand, God's got you. God's going to take care of you. It says in verse 32 of Luke chapter 12, don't be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Look, here's what you need to understand. Your heavenly Father owns it all. He created it all. He has no lack, and it pleases him to give that to you. It pleases him to supply the needs that you have. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Here's what I'm encouraging you to do. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourself that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes and no moth destroys. And then he says this, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus wanted everyone in attendance, everyone who was there to listen, to hear, to understand, to know. I'm with you, and I'm going to provide your needs. Trust me and care about others. See, here's what Jesus knew, and here's what we know as well. Fear doesn't always manifest itself in the same way. Fear doesn't always manifest itself in a singular way. Sometimes fear causes us to just freeze in terror. Like we can't move, we can't function, we can't flourish. Other times, fear causes us to fight, to lash out, to attack. And then in other instances, like this one, fear causes us to be self-preservationists. It leads us to be selfish. It leads us to look at our own needs as the most important. So let me get this straight, Heath. What you're saying is we need to care for people created in the image of God and not store things up for ourselves. So does that mean that Jesus says, hey, you take care of other people to the detriment of your own life and your own family? No, that's not what Jesus is saying. How do I know? Because in the very next verses, in the very next 2 verses, here's what Jesus has to say. He says, be dressed and ready. Be prepared. Be dressed and ready for service and keep your lamps burning. He's like, look, guys, I'm not telling you not to be prepared. I'm not telling you not to be wise. Be prepared, keep your lamps burning like servants waiting for their master to return from a wedding so that when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door for him. I want you to be prepared, but here's what I need you to understand. You don't need to be prepared to the extent that there's nothing left for anybody else. You don't need to be prepared to the extent that you don't care about the needs of someone who might be beside you. Your planning for the future, it starts to harm other people when it keeps them from being able to meet immediate needs that they have. So yes, be wise. Yes, take care of your family. Yes, prepare for this unknown season that we're walking into. But as you're preparing, as you're planning, as you're making preparations for whoever knows how long this is going to last, do so with others in mind as well. How can I serve someone else? How can I care for somebody else? How can I give someone else what they need? How can I bless another person and not just bless myself? This guy who had this bumper crop, he was self-centered. He was self-seeking. He never once thought that maybe there's somebody around me who doesn't have enough food that I could help out with. He never thought for a minute, maybe, just maybe, there's somebody that's in need. And the reason that God has blessed me, the reason that God has given me this bumper crop is so that I can help meet the needs of someone else. Let's not fall into that same trap. This week, as I was preparing and studying, I was almost finished writing my sermon, and I took a much needed mental break. And I don't know if anybody else does that, but I will just mindlessly scroll on social media for no rhyme or reason. It's a really good time waster, and it helps just kind of free my mind for a bit. So I happened to do that. This was probably Thursday afternoon as I was putting the finishing touches on my sermon for this morning. And I opened up Twitter, and I just am scrolling through, and all of a sudden I come to this quote. And I thought, this is interesting because this is exactly what I'm preaching about on Sunday morning. And so I'm going to quote one of my favorite pastors, Andy Stanley. Here's what he wrote. Fear always invites us to follow the path of self-preservation. Fear always invites us to follow the path of self-preservation. Fear wants you and wants me to take care of my 4 and no more. Or in my case, my 6, and I don't know what rhymes with 6. So my 4 and no more. But as followers of Jesus, I'm called to care for my 4 or my 6. But I'm also called to care for you. And so in this season of unknown, when fear has the potential to grab our hearts and drag us down the path of selfishness, we've got to fight that temptation. We've got to fight that mentality. And the greatest way we can do that is by being generous. And so here's what I want to challenge you to do. And then I'm going to tell you what we're doing. I want to challenge you this week as you go out and as you get your groceries or you do whatever it is that you have to do to survive and plan for your future. Think about picking something up for somebody else. Maybe you have a neighbor who is a little older and just can't get out. Grab some groceries for them while you're there. Maybe your mom or your dad are still living and they need someone to care for them so they don't have to expose themselves to what's going on. Maybe you can think of a mom or a dad who was thrust in becoming a homeschooler unexpectedly. And you can reach out because you've got some resources or you have some information, and you can just be a gift. You can be a blessing. You can be an asset. Say, hey, you've got this, and I can encourage you. Maybe it's just calling and checking in on somebody. Hey, how you doing? I know this has been really weird, especially your extroverted friends, because they're struggling. Go and check on them. Make sure they're okay, or call and check on them. Don't go. Stay home. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Those are some little things that we can do to care for other people. Now, what are we going to do here? Here at Level 13, we are making ourselves available to help those who are connected to our church, and maybe even those who are not, who find themselves in a place of need. So if you have a need, if there's something significant going on in your world, I want you to reach out to me. I want you to send me an email, Heath, Heath, at level13church.com. And I'll make sure that we get back with you. And if there is any way possible that we can help you meet the need that you have, we're going to do everything we can to do that. Because we're not going to stand here, we're not going to be on stage and sing worship songs and preach a message about caring for other people and then not care for other people. We're going to be aware and stay away from that yeast of the Pharisees that Jesus talked about, we mentioned earlier, that was hypocrisy. We're not going to have any part of that. We want to care for those in our community in need of being cared for. So if you have a need, if there's something going on in your world, if it's just a prayer, if it's a financial need, if it's a physical need, let me know. And we'll do everything we can to meet that need. Here's the encouragement for all of us. Let's hoard less. Let's give more. And let's make Jesus recognizable in the midst of this unknown season that we're all walking into, for the glory of his name, so that he is the one that people see is with them. And maybe, just maybe, Jesus with us through this season is you and me. Father, in Jesus' name, I pray this morning for your grace to overcome that natural temptation to be selfish and to be self-centered. Father, I pray in Jesus' name that you would overcome that desire within us that is birthed there by fear. Help us to be generous. Help us to be giving. Help us look for ways to meet needs that need to be met. Lord, we're not sure how long this quarantine and how long this outbreak is going to last. But as followers of Jesus, those of us who are watching and we call ourselves followers of Jesus, I pray that we would really take to heart the need to care for and serve one another. God, speak to us this morning. Before we enter into our final worship song today, just want to pause. Maybe you're tuned in watching this morning and you're not a follower of Jesus. You've never said yes to Jesus. You've never made a decision to follow him. And in fact, you're a little bit confused about what Jesus is all about and not sure if you completely believe, but you're scared and you're curious. I want to speak specifically to you this morning. I know it's scary, and I know it may not all make sense, but I believe with everything within me that Jesus is the answer. And whatever your questions, whatever your hang-ups, whatever your worries or your concerns might be, if you have problems navigating some of the language of the Bible, or you've heard people who've talked about things who said they follow Jesus, but they've acted in a completely different manner, don't let that keep you from saying yes to Jesus. If you're watching this morning, or you're watching at any time, somebody encourages you to watch, they show the video again, and you're just happening to be in earshot, and you're curious, you're interested, I want to invite you to consider Jesus. I want to invite you get in contact with us. You can do it through our Facebook page. You can send me an email anonymously. Just make up a fake email address and send it to me, and I'll correspond with you. If you have questions about what it means to be a follower of Jesus, you want to say yes to Jesus for the very first time, or you want to come back to Jesus, you once knew him, you walked away from your faith, you want to come back to him, then I want to give you the opportunity to do that. I want to encourage you to do that. So Father, I pray right now in Jesus' name for those who are watching this stream, watching this video later, and they don't know you. God, would you just draw them to yourself? God, would you give them the boldness, the courage to just reach out and ask a question so that they might meet Jesus in the midst of this unknown, and they don't have to walk through this unknown by themselves. They can say yes to you and have someone with them, and then we can lock arms and we can walk together and follow you together. Father, may your will be done in this place and in every home and in every place that's represented where people are watching today. In Jesus' name.